Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Alaska got sold to Liechtenstein. Most of you probably know that Alaska used to be part of Russia and that due to financial problems Russia sold Alaska, and that's how the US got Alaska. That was the cheapest land purchase in recorded history. And looking at Alaska, it is actually doing pretty well for a cold area. There are many resources, there are some bigger settlements and even cities with a pretty decent population. Alaska is a state of the US enjoying a fair degree of autonomy. Alaska is a very beautiful nature, and if you like cold weather, it's the place to be. Alaska's population is very diverse, and there are still some native Alaskans in some areas where they even make up the majority nowadays. But what if all of that changed? What if Alaska got sold to Liechtenstein? The reason why I'm doing this alternate history is a very intriguing one. Before selling Alaska to the US, the Russian Tsar considered selling Alaska to a friend of his who happened to be the Prince of Liechtenstein. We are not talking about the state or the Principality of Liechtenstein, but the family of Liechtenstein. Because yes, the dynasty who rules the Principality of Liechtenstein is the family of Liechtenstein. According to two sources, the Schweizer Rundfunk and Welt am Sonntag, Alaska was sold to the US only after the Russian Tsar proposed to sell it to the family of Liechtenstein. At first, all of this was just portrayed as a rumor because Liechtenstein had to protect its neutrality and there was actually no written proof. However, much to the surprise of everyone else, the Prince Hans Adam II confirmed this to be true. So he came and he said that this topic is still vividly discussed among the family, and that even if written documents are lacking, he is sure that one day these documents might reappear. The very fact that the prince intervened in this discussion shows there might be some truth, although we shouldn't exclude the fact that he could be lying, yes, but for real I don't see any reason why he would lie on such an issue. Now, let's imagine the prince would agree in 1867, and instead of the US, Liechtenstein would get Alaska. The prince would probably have a smaller collection of arts and other things, but he would own Alaska. Alaska would technically fall under the same category as Congo did under Leopold. We would have some type of free state of Alaska, but without the cruelty that happened in Congo. Why? Well, first of all, Alaska is pretty close to the US and British Canada. Both countries, or one country and the other part of Britain, they were very liberal for their time, and we would also not really see a mistreatment of the native population as we did in Congo. But if there would be any type of smaller mistreatment of the native population, a good reason for them would be to intervene in there, although US and Britain were never really angels to begin with. Another thing I want to mention is that politically Liechtenstein would also have to change a lot. Their relationship system would be different with the US and Britain. They would need to improve out of strategic interest and necessity, and they would try to distance themselves more and more from the German Empire. The Habsburg monarchy would still be vital for some more years, but afterwards Liechtenstein would be able to go away from the Austrian sphere of influence, but we'll discuss this a bit later. But they would now at first have a port in Austria, and maybe later on it would change as well. Alaska would receive Swiss immigrants, of course people from Liechtenstein, many immigrants from Austria, and also probably few people of the US and British Canada. It is possible that the first economic branch of Alaska would be forestry, as there is a lot of nature, there are a lot of trees, and also there would be a lot of development in the American continent. Alaska would become the typical exploitation economy, and much of the resources would at first go to Europe until the moment where the Prince of Liechtenstein would recognize that it would be very costful and not profitable in the long run. Alaska at that moment would not only have forestry but also gold mining and other types of mining. Probably Italians and Poles would also immigrate to Alaska for work, in the mines for instance, and having a port in today's northeastern Italy, Trieste, would certainly help them to move to Alaska. Liechtenstein, the free state of Alaska and the US, would sign some more economic treaties. Even after the reconstruction area, the US needed a lot of wood and different type of metals, while the immigrants that would come to Alaska would slowly but surely establish an internal demand, an internal market. Yes, life would be expensive, but with the promise of gold, free land, freedom and whatnot, many people would take their things, pack everything and try their luck. The US would in the long run get a more privileged position and have the advantage towards Britain, but Britain too would be able to get a share of Alaska. You also have to remember that due to the Monroe Doctrine, Liechtenstein would also need to establish Alaska in some sort of independent state, although it would never really be an independent state and just belong to the prince, but I think this would be a fairly good way to somehow go around the demands or the points of the Monroe Doctrine and being a not really dangerous country and giving the US and the Brits what they want. It would probably fare very well for Liechtenstein. Then we also have Johann II, whose reign was the third longest in the world. He was a smart man and he was looking for many opportunities to find new allies. In OTL he tried to find new allies and he did so with Switzerland, but given the fact that he had now Alaska, it is very clear that he would accept the US and British demands, while also keeping Austria far from him. And I think that due to the fact that he was able to even get an alliance and economic treaties with Switzerland in OTL, he would be also very able and capable for do the same with the US and Britain. I think that after having a good relation with the US and Britain, Johann II would try to make good relations with Italy next. Austria would not be able to block them anymore. Britain and the US would have the back of Liechtenstein and wait for a moment to weaken Austria, and Italy would certainly like to make some deals and get some money. Moreover, having someone like Johann II in power, someone who ordered the most modern telegraph at the time and the telephone around 1890, Alaska would certainly not be a backwards colony. Certainly, railways with Canada and the US as well as shipping routes would be expanded and added throughout Alaska. German, Swiss, Austrian, Liechtensteinian, Italian engineers would be invited to come and get free land as well, which some of them would gladly take. Developments along the coast, people who were used to the harsh cold and hard-working experienced specialists, they would transform Alaska much quicker than in OTL, and politically Alaska would have a longer history as an entity, not just as some type of district or some free territory or whatever. With Japan becoming a world power, also Japan would be an interesting partner for Liechtenstein and the free state of Alaska. Timber would be exported, gold, and soon Alaska would also have some factories where many types of metal would be processed, and Japan would be in need of these metals. German would be for sure the administrative language, with English being the business language or the secret administrative language, and Japanese would now actually be able to replace Russian as a second business language. During World War I, Liechtenstein would officially be neutral, but they would now definitely cut relations with Austria, and pass through Switzerland and Italy to send their trains to their port, which they would lease. The former part of the Austrian territory would be resold to Austria, or they would just never extend the contract. I could also imagine that Liechtenstein could have sovereignty over the railways, only while the surrounding territories would still belong to Switzerland and Italy. Check the Vennbahn, for instance, where you have an example between Belgium and Germany, where you have one country owning the railways and the surrounding territories are owned by another country. Liechtenstein during World War I would not officially declare war, but strongly support, of course, Italy, France, UK and the US, which would put them in a good light. The biggest change that might happen is after the death of Johann II. The successor of Franz I would now have to be very careful with Alaska. Alaska could not just be annexed like Congo. Remember, the US had the Monroe Doctrine, so instead Franz I would elevate Alaska's status into a kingdom, because Alaska is a very big place, and he would now be the ruler of Liechtenstein as a prince, but he would be the king of Alaska. The US would be happy with this, seeing that Alaska would be an independent country. Alaska, however, would be ruled from within, while Franz I would have to solve family problems at first, issues with Czechoslovakia and his castles, with the Habsburg dynasty, and so on and so forth. Alaska could also become an attractive country to immigrate, especially during the Great Depression, and I think that Alaska wouldn't be hit that hard as most other countries. Probably the farmers who petitioned the installation of a republic in Liechtenstein would still make the same petition, but money from Alaska would still be transferred to Liechtenstein nonetheless. Relations with Italy would continue to be good until probably the late 30s. That's the deadline where I would put good relations between Liechtenstein and Italy. In there, Liechtenstein would face problems as a country, not being able to access Alaska so good anymore or even at all. Even if they would get through France, through Switzerland, that would just be cut off in the 1940s. Perhaps Hitler would take greater interest in annexing Liechtenstein too, and seeing how the successor Franz Josef II would escape to Alaska, the population of Liechtenstein would really feel forgotten. After World War II, Liechtenstein and Alaska's relationship would not be the same anymore, and I believe that similar to Brazil and Portugal, we might see the Liechtenstein family split into two branches, or Alaska would get even more independent and take a similar path as Canada or Australia and just share the head of state with Liechtenstein, but not give any taxpayer money or special treatment to Liechtenstein, and also officially the administration, because Alaska would be administrated from within since a very long time, they would now finally have the power within Alaska, and there would be really no influence from Liechtenstein except from the head of state, but that would be blocked by a really good constitution, and we would have a constitutional monarchy in Alaska. Liechtenstein would get a lot of money from Italy because Italy would have ruined Liechtenstein's economy, and if everything would turn right with the Marshall Plan, the population might tolerate the monarchy for a longer time, but within Liechtenstein we would also get a constitution, maybe not so limiting as the one we would have in Alaska, but it would be a more progressive one, politically speaking. I also think that with all of this, Liechtenstein would at the end get an even better standard of life, but they would face huge problems down the line with real estate and income equality, because Liechtenstein is a very small country, and the more people you get, the more real estate you build, the more expensive it gets. Alaska, on the contrary, they would blossom. I think that it would evolve even better than in OTL, with the engineers and other specialists coming. Oil would also be discovered earlier on, allowing the Kingdom of Alaska to establish a social welfare state with funds and higher standards of life, similar to those of Iceland and Norway, but maybe even exceeding them. Pair this with geology and volcanic activity, and we would have the energy powerhouse of the Americas, leading to more immigration, more investments to Alaska, and it could easily have the double of population and in OTL, if not the triple. Depending on how they would deal with the immigration, Alaska could prosper, or they could suffer from negative consequences. And then there would also be the whole issue with the Eingeborenen, as they would call them, or the natives. And honestly, I don't know how Liechtenstein and Alaska would deal with them, because Liechtenstein was never in any situation where they dealt with a native population, so I have no clue about it. In an alternate 2020, both the Kingdom of Alaska and the Principality of Liechtenstein, or if you prefer the German version, Königreich Alaska und das Fürstentum Liechtenstein, would still be very much associated one with another, only because of the dynasty or the same head of state, except that in one way the worst outcome, we could have two different heads of states from the same dynasty, or we could have the same head of state for both states, just like Queen Elizabeth, for instance, but she is the head of states of multiple countries. But also the constitution would be very, very, very limiting the power of the king and also of the prince in the same time. Only that in Alaska it would be much stronger, and in Liechtenstein it would be a bit easier for the prince to control or to interfere in politics. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.